Na ulit, resume na yung program. So ito na yung last na talk for the night. So I'm going to talk as si Norman. Yeah.
So, yung talk about Hanami framework. So, gusto ko lang mag-make talk na to because okay na ba? So, I wanted to give this talk because really, I think for already 2 years, I'm not using Rails. I'm using different lightweight frameworks, and for the past 2 months, I discovered using this framework. It's a full-featured. It's very lightweight. Has sensible defaults called Hanami framework. It used to be named Lotus RB, but they changed it. I don't know, like 3 weeks. 2 weeks ago because of copyright issues with Lotus made by IBM. So they changed it to Hanami framework. Yeah. So before I talk about the framework, I want to talk
Full
about
screen.
the concept behind it. Maybe the difference with the Rails way of doing or organizing your code. Yeah. So basically, I just want to have give an overview. So typically, when you're developing in Rails, so all your requests go to the controller, and most of the time you actually use a Poro to transform your input or your parameters, and then most of the time you then pass it to the model to do your use case, and then go back to the controller and then render it using your favorite probably SAS or like Slim, or I don't know, or just plain ERB. But for this framework, the concept is different because as much as possible, you want to control the dependencies between the different layers of your application. So you can see here there are concentric circles, and the idea is all your dependencies must move inward. So for example, your entities, which basically is just like an object or your a function within your specific your application. So this one, it shouldn't have any dependencies outside outside of it. So for example, usually I don't know, for Rails, if you're developing in Rails, the way you do it is you have some sort of behavior or implementation within your model, which is very dependent, or which can depend on the context, on which controller action that processes this request. But for this one, you have specific boundaries. So for example, the entities are your you can think of it as your typical plain model. And you have the use cases, which is just implementing your application-specific behavior. And then outside of that one, you have the controllers, the gateways and the centers. And outside of that one, that's where you have your your database, your UI, your web, and I don't know what's devices doing here. So yeah, so basically that's, I'm not sure explain it well, but if you want to get a more thorough understanding, just read about plain architecture. I'm sure there are a lot of references about it. So yeah, here you can see just a typical flow. So you have the dependencies. You can see the arrows here. It points towards the dependencies. So your controller will depend on your use cases. So just refer to the color coding. So your controller will depend on the use case input, and then your interactor will depend on the input and then do some logic there, or depending on your on the context, and then put it in the, like, have a use case output port, and then your presenter, which is typically your views, will depend on this use case output port. So yeah, just some core how it's implemented. So in Rails, you typically just have like controllers, views, and models. So, but for Hanami, you have the entities, or what we call entities or repositories, live in the root part of your in the root directory of your project. So it's not like in typical Rails, you put the models inside the app. So you want to have it as much as little dependency as much as possible. So entities, basically, this is the innermost part of the diagram before, and repositories is kind of like you want to have an abstraction when dealing with your when dealing with the database. So typically, you don't anything outside the call this entities or repositories. You don't have any API calls that are very specific to the ORM that you're using. So you typically have to go through the API exposed by your within your repositories, and then the repositories would take care of doing all the read and writes, whether it's in your whether or not your database is within the same server or outside of in a different host. Yeah, and also you have containers, so container everything, right? Yeah, so very similar concept. So also I forget to mention that the idea of Hanami is that if you're trying to venture into microservices, but you don't want to have different applications in different code base or Git repository, you can have like different containers within the same Git repository, or you have different mini applications within the same repository, and all of these mini applications will run under a single process, Ruby process. So you can have just just run a single server, then it will mount all these different mini applications in like a rack application of this subcontainers. So it really defines strict boundary within all your controllers, all your assets, and templates and views. So templates just similar to your views in Rails, and views here is more of like your helpers when you need more logic, which is very specific to your templates. Yeah. So just a typical our root directory. So apps contains the your mini your sub applications. Like for example, you have one application that's dealing with the customer facing app, and then you have one application that deals with your admin interface. Another application can be more of implementing your own API. So you can separate all of those within different containers. And also within those containers, you can add insert different wrap middlewares depending on the context of your application. Yeah. So for features, so it's really it's full featured. It's very different from you have your Synapse application where you have to mix and match and pick up the different middlewares that you would like to use. This one, you have already the migrations for your data evolution, so it's actually just SQL under the hood. So if you want to try it out, I think it's not that obvious, but if you want to do more on the migrations, you just refer to the SQL library. This one I really like this. Personal opinion, I think it's the best ORM aside from Active Record. So you also have content security policy. It really has good defaults. It also has assets preprocessor if you're using SAS, and also routing helpers. I think this is just basically what you would need to get your app up and running. And also they have used Minitest instead of RSpec. So as much as possible, they want to have it like lightweight, not really that how to call this, using a big library to do your test. So, and also I forgot to mention that the good thing about this is that, or maybe not the good thing, maybe it's just a thing, but if you most of the in Rails you have one controller and then they have different actions within that same controller. But for this one, they only use one controller or one file to implement just one action. And for me, it really makes sense when you go back to that diagram before, wherein you sort of think about the dependencies and how it's going to, how what's the context of your application, and what are you going to do with the input, how you're going to process it, what business logic, or I don't know, what behavior you want, what you're trying to do. Like for example, just a specific example. So for Rails, typically, not sure if it's still the case. I'm not that updated with Rails, so you use strong parameters to filter out the incoming input from the user input. But that typically, that context will change depending on, the parameters that you need to filter will change depending on the context. Like for example, if you're an admin, you want to set a specific user to an admin, then you can set that the admin flag can be, the admin flag can be permitted for that specific action. But for this another action, generic action, you typically do not want to do that. So, I'm just planning to show maybe a little bit of code, but I don't think that's possible right now. But I made an application just for trying out this framework, and I really find it very, it really it's really great to use this one. It's really lightweight. I don't have to deal with excessive abstractions when using Rails. So and maybe it's different. So it's different from you guys. It's just a preference. So if you also want to have that kind of to use that kind of library, and you want to have that kind of philosophy that put out excessive fat as much as possible, then maybe this will appeal to you. I'm not sure if you want to see the application, or maybe you will just want to approach me, want to see some source code or see the application. Question?
Yeah, so would you build any app with this? Like, how I would hear a lot before, let's say someone did like Sinatra, they use it, but eventually when it gets big, parang naging Rails na rin because they installed so many things. Would you use this only for small apps or even large, or apps will become large apps?
it's still not yet. It's not yet version 1.0. It's still 0.7.2. So there are still a lot of, I think, not so much. For me, it's very complete feature wise. It's just more on the conventions to try to improve, to change, and try to set the defaults. But for making big apps, I don't know. It really depends on how you use the language. Like, for example, if you really depend on these helpers, or probably what Rails provides, then maybe yeah, it suits for you to just use all this magic that comes along with this framework. But for me, as long as you have that strict like coding guidelines about how you do your implementation, where you organize how you organize it, where to place it. I think it can also be done. Like I was part of a project that just a use case. I was part of a project that just using plain like Greek and just small frameworks. Not really just maybe the gem file. It's just a little bit. I don't know, like 15 lines, but we really rely more on the like service objects, and maybe we're trying to re-implement all the helpers that other libraries provide, but as much as possible we want to try to do it like to cut off the magic and just have very simple objects in implementing your the use cases for your application or your APIs or. Okay. So, I think for this one, I would use this even for large projects. I see a lot of potential in this one. In really, thinking about your code, how it grows. Yeah, maybe you should check it out. So, even if you're not planning to use it, because you have all this framework, it's really just trying to test different kind of things and then forgetting them because you're not using it. But even if you're not planning to use this one, just go through all the documentation. I really find some of the lessons and principles that they discuss very informative, especially in how you implement your application. So. Any more questions?
So you mentioned pwedeng you have a microservices architecture where several apps are in a single source control repository. So one Ruby process for everything or one Ruby process per app?
It's one Ruby process for everything.
So have you tried using that, like you have four or five apps in one Ruby process? So have you done any like kahit smoke test lang kung if it's slow or fast, or having four apps in one process?
I haven't really done any performance testing, but the way it works, as far as I understand, is that they use like you mount it like as a middleware. So the abstraction of the container is much similar to the abstraction of the middleware. When for example in your Sinatra app, you just want to mount this specific middleware, and the concept is you put a namespace for a different namespace for your application. Like you have a namespace for your front-facing component, and you have like put an admin namespace within your for your admin. So it's very the concept is very similar to that one, but as far as making smoke testing, I haven't really done any come up with any figures. Yeah, so documentation is very very good. So it's very straightforward. So if you want to try it, just
Do you, do you find yourself using any gems, like active something gems?
Not really. If I can help it. I want to try to minimize, if you import it and then it comes along with these other dependencies that you really do not like. So if, as much as you can, just import that specific function, then put it somewhere in library and then just call it that way. I depend on picture, but I'm afraid it might not be working. So so just go with it and just approach me.